On this Saturday night, an Ottawa teen facing terror charges. His father speaks to Global News.
We never use violence, nothing, you know.
The alleged plot, the target, and the possible motive. Sorrow and anger. The devastating details behind the mistaken killing of 3 Israeli hostages by the IDF. Fake art finds, BC's bogus Group of 7 exhibit. Canada's longest-running radio documentary show celebrates a milestone.
The ongoing history of new music is a throwback to the old days when you would turn on the radio.
Why what's old is attracting new audiences.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news tonight. A Global News exclusive out of Ottawa, where a high school student has been arrested by the RCMP in relation to an alleged terrorism plot against the Jewish community. Let's get right to our bureau chief, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa. Mercedes, how did this all unfold?
Farah, last night the RCMP carried out a highly sensitive national security operation here in Ottawa, arresting a teenager on terror charges, a story that we broke earlier this afternoon. The investigation involved multiple police forces and CSIS, Canada's spy agency. The RCMP say the target was the Jewish community. The teenager is charged with facilitation of terrorist activity by communicating instructional material related to an explosive substance, and he's also charged with knowingly instructing, directly or indirectly, a person to carry out a terrorist attack against Jewish persons. Sources say RCMP tactical team was on hand for the arrest, as were officers from the chemical, biological, nuclear and high explosives team. Not a surprise given what those charges had to say about communicating instructions on an explosive substance for terrorist activity. 2 national security sources say the teen was ideologically motivated and that he was influenced by someone they believe who was involved with a group that has an ideology that is ISIS-like. The young man's father spoke with Global News outside the courthouse earlier today after his son appeared. He said the boy is in grade 10 and that he's been concerned about religious extremists trying to radicalize his son.
And I warned him many times, me and his mother, stay away from, extremists or something. We never had this in the family. We don't have, but it seems, I think he's minor, he's 15 years old. I think they try to use him and they stay in some people, that's what I think. Some extremists, they try to use him. He's kind of naive. He never used violence, nothing, I'm surprised.
The boy's father told us that he and the mother of the teenager had tried to set up counseling with an imam at a local mosque, but it's unclear whether the teen followed through. National security sources have told me that they are deeply concerned about threats to the Jewish community in Canada from both neo-Nazi hate groups and groups like ISIS. There are active investigations unfolding across the country. Tonight, sources in the Jewish community say they are afraid, but also relieved that police are acting. The Canadian Centre for Israel-Jewish Affairs told Global News the arrest and charges laid today against an individual are a staggering development of what unchecked anti-Semitism has become in our country.
And Mercedes, you've also heard from your national security sources that this is not a one-off case, and it isn't limited to one group specifically being targeted.
That's correct. And in fact, in a press release tonight, it matched what my sources had been telling me that the RCMP put out, saying that there have been 5 youth this year. That means people under the age of 18 who have been charged with terrorism charges. That's a really serious charge. And they're looking at a number of different groups. There's concern about neo-Nazis like Atomwaffen Division targeting youth. There's concerns about ISIS targeting youth. But the commonality is this attempt to influence young people. And the RCMP are actually so concerned that they are launching a national campaign to educate parents about the signs of radicalization. And we have 2 examples up on the screen there. You can see of the kind of material that police have used in the past and that I'm told they are planning to use again. And we just have a couple of things quickly, Farah, that police are asking parents to watch for tonight, including if your child appears to be increasingly exclusive in their association with social groups promoting violence, expression of us versus them mentalities, the dehumanization of others, and extreme anti-government attitudes. They're saying if you see any of that, you should get involved.
Okay, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks for your coverage on this. And you can read more about the alleged terror plot Mercedes spoke about on our website, globalnews.ca. To the Middle East now, fallout after Friday's news that the Israeli military mistakenly killed 3 Hamas hostages in Gaza. The tragedy has realized the fears of family members whose loved ones were taken captive by Hamas on October 7th. Now, most of their loved ones have long worried the siege is endangering the hostages further. Despite Israel's error, it continues its bombardment in Gaza in a war which has already killed thousands of Palestinians, many of them women and children. But as Sean O'Shea reports, this incident is fueling stronger calls from within Israel to stop hostilities altogether.
The bombardment of Gaza didn't let up on Saturday, even in the wake of a deadly mistake. On Friday, 3 Israeli hostages held captive since October 7th were shot and killed. A terrible blunder which the Israeli Defense Forces acknowledged, admitting their soldiers mistakenly identified 3 kidnapped Israelis as a threat. Published reports in Israel say a military investigation has found the men were bare-chested and carrying a white flag when they were shot. All 3 men were in their 20s. They had somehow escaped their captors when they were approaching a military position in Gaza City. In Israel, the news was another blow for the families of hostages who live in hope and fear.
My reaction, first of all, was grief. These are families that I know personally and people that have been waiting so hopefully for their loved ones to return.
Hundreds of protesters blocked a main highway in Tel Aviv, calling for the hostages' return. While more than 100 hostages have been released, a similar number are still missing. Many families want negotiations, not more fighting, to get their loved ones back.
And put the best offer on the table to get the hostages back alive. Alive. We don't want them back in bags.
There is a need to just stop and talk.
The head of the Palestinian delegation to Canada says it's time for Israel to stop its military action in Gaza.
The way Israel is portraying its war on Hamas is not really a war on Hamas. It's a war on the Palestinian people.
Israel says it's targeting Hamas, not civilians, insisting the group's fighters intentionally use civilians as cover. This week, Canada joined Australia and New Zealand at the United Nations, voting for what it called an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
But that ceasefire can't be one-sided. Hamas needs to lay down its arms. Hamas needs to free all the hostages they have right now.
The accidental deaths of the hostages at the hands of the military has family members watching the clock more closely.
We have no time. That's what my clock that I took to the United States and to any meeting says. We have no time.
Sean O'Shea, Global News, Toronto.
In the Red Sea, U.S. and U.K. naval ships have engaged over a dozen attack drones, marking the latest hostilities on ships traveling in that region. Britain's defense secretary says the British vessel shot down a suspected attack drone targeting a merchant ship. And U.S. officials say an American destroyer took down 14 others. Iran-backed Houthi rebels from Yemen have recently attacked ships they suspect are linked to Israel due to the crisis in Gaza. And it's caused some major transportation companies to pause operations in the Red Sea. Winnipeg police are investigating the stabbing death of a teenage girl yesterday afternoon. It happened in broad daylight in a busy part of downtown. Investigators say she was rushed to hospital and she underwent emergency surgery, but sadly died from her injuries. No arrests have been made. Police are looking for multiple suspects who left the scene, and they will provide more information to the public on Monday. A Salmonella outbreak across this country has now claimed 6 lives, with the number of confirmed cases continuing to rise. Since October, 153 people across Canada have been diagnosed with Salmonella linked to the outbreak. The cases are now spread out across 8 provinces, with Quebec having the most amount of cases at 103. On Friday, Mexico's health department ordered the temporary closure of a melon packing plant implicated in the infections. Now, they did not name the company involved, but Canada's public health agency has linked the outbreak to Malakita and Ruby brand cantaloupes. Opposition MPs are demanding Ottawa block Beijing's acquisition of Canada's only rare earth mining company. That says China acquires shares in the Australian firm that owns it. In a statement, the Conservatives say Ottawa has the responsibility to trigger a national security review of this investment. As Heidi Petracek reports, industry insiders want Ottawa to take more assertive action to keep China out of domestic resources.
They help power the modern world. Rare earth elements used to make permanent magnets for smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines. But a year after the federal government announced its plan to spend billions on boosting a locally sourced supply, there are concerns Ottawa isn't doing enough to protect that supply from China, the dominant player in the global market.
This is a non-existent supply chain actually in Canada.
Halifax-based Ucore plans to use proprietary technology to process rare earth elements at a plant in Ontario, and it hopes to eventually purchase raw material from Canada's first operating rare earth mine, the Nechalacho mine in the Northwest Territories. But an initial financial investment in the struggling Australian company behind that mine, Vital Metals, by a major Chinese player, Shenghe Resources, has triggered concerns it could mean eventual diversion of the mineral resources to China. Neither company returned requests for comment from Global News.
We've seen them do that in Africa, and we know that most likely this will be the same result in Canada too.
It happened with the Canadian lithium mine in 2021, leading Ottawa to announce tighter rules for critical mineral investments.
As soon as those acquisitions are proposed by entities headquartered in China, they should be an automatic review by this minister, and the minister should stop them from happening.
The federal department responsible would only tell Global News it's, quote, aware of the proposed transaction, and writes in a statement in part, the confidentiality provisions of the Investment Canada Act mean the government cannot comment on reviews.
How is it that we are still relying on a Chinese investor to come with, again, $6 million, $9 million, $15 million to save a Canadian rare earths project from facing demise?
Without enough domestic investment, she says, fledgling rare earth companies have few financing options to get product out of the ground and meet Ottawa's goal of sourcing Canadian supply for growing global demand. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
A Roman Catholic cardinal has been convicted of embezzlement by a Vatican tribunal. Cardinal Angelo Becciu is the first cardinal ever prosecuted by the Vatican Criminal Court. He was sentenced to 5.5 years in jail. The charges are related to a money-losing investment at a London property. The 2.5-year trial, dubbed the Vatican's trial of the century, involved 10 defendants and almost 50 charges brought against them. Featured forgeries in Vancouver's art gallery. Coming up, why these counterfeits of Canadian masterworks are getting the spotlight. Plus, the conflicting views over a possible ceasefire in Gaza between Canada and its closest ally at the United Nations. The U.S. ambassador to Canada weighs in. Canada's renowned Group of Seven are best known for their paintings inspired by Canadian landscapes. Their world-famous art movement dates back to the early 1900s. Now, forgeries of some of those works are the focus of a unique exhibit in Vancouver. And as Catherine Urquhart reports, it's not the only fraudulent art making headlines this week.
Initially, the 10 oil sketches were thought to be works by Canadian artist J.E.H. MacDonald, who founded the influential Group of Seven in the 1920s and 30s. All turned out to be fakes.
But you're also given an opportunity here to test your own eye.
Now they're part of a CSI-type exhibition at the Vancouver Art Gallery.
That tells the story of the Vancouver Art Gallery's investigation of these sketches in all its forms. It does this, as you'll see, with video interviews with many of the key participants, with documents from the research that's been undertaken, and of course with artworks from our collection.
The purported masterworks were acquired in 2015. Questions about their authenticity soon followed. An in-depth investigation revealed it was impossible they could be legitimate.
The sketches each contained one or more pigments that weren't available during MacDonald's lifetime, showing that he couldn't have painted these works.
Across the country, in Thunder Bay, Ontario, a man accused of counterfeiting hundreds of works by Indigenous artist Norval Morisseau was handed a 5-year prison term this week. It was the largest art fraud in Canadian history.
3 of the works on this wall are contested works, and the rest are all securely attributed.
In Vancouver, the 5 months-long exhibit of fake McDonald's is meant to educate and provoke thought.
It's a great opportunity to have a public conversation about the importance of art, about visual information, about the media.
This Vancouver Art Gallery display, surely one of its more unique exhibitions. Catherine Urquhart, Global News, Vancouver.
Ahead, Washington and Ottawa at odds at the UN. A U.S. top diplomat reacts to Canada's call for a ceasefire. Earlier this week, Canada voted in favor of the United Nations resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. But the U.S. was one of 10 countries to vote against the non-binding resolution, meaning the two countries are no longer on the same page publicly when it comes to the war. Mercedes Stephenson joins us once again from Ottawa with a reaction from the U.S. ambassador to Canada. Mercedes.
Farah, it was a significant shift in Canada's positioning this week, with Canada calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. I asked U.S. Ambassador David Cohen if he was surprised by Ottawa's position when it diverged from Washington. Cohen said that while he was not given a heads up warning him that Canada was going to change their tone, he wasn't shocked either, having noticed a building momentum and domestic pressure in Canada to adopt the position of a ceasefire.
Look, I was not surprised by it. I sort of see the tea leaves as you do and anyone who is paying attention.
I also asked Cohen about national security threats, including Iranian regime officials who are operating here in Canada, and calls from American lawmakers to designate the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist group in Canada. I asked the ambassador if that is what the Biden administration is looking for. We'll find out on the show. And we'll take a look at the state of Canada's military. Ambassador Cohen takes a harder line on Canada needing to address threats.
I'm focused on continental defense and making sure that Canada and the United States together, under the auspices of NORAD, are in a position to defend our homeland. And no secret that I don't think the level of spending now is sufficient to be able to accomplish that objective.
Ambassador Cohen was optimistic with me about the Liberals' upcoming long-awaited defense policy review, but with a presidential election coming, there's lots of big questions that will be up in the air about the Canada-U.S. relationship. Farah?
Mercedes, thanks again. You can watch Mercedes' full interview with U.S. Ambassador to Canada David Cohen on tomorrow's The West Block right here on Global. History goes on. Next, celebrating a milestone for a Canadian music historian. There are not many people on the planet who have a Rolodex of rock stars they can call anytime for an interview. But you see, Alan Cross is not like most people. The music historian, author, and syndicated Chorus radio host just celebrated a milestone of his trailblazing show, The Ongoing History of New Music. I spoke with Alan about some of his unforgettable moments along the way.
Sunday night.
If professional music geek was a job, it would belong to Alan Cross.
I'm still here in 2023 doing a show that began in 1993.
Cross's groundbreaking syndicated radio show, The Ongoing History of New Music, just celebrated its 1,000th episode. And in that time, he's experienced a life most Canadians could only dream of. Partying with Bono, having drinks with Springsteen, and flying to London for a middle-of-the-night interview with The Cure's Robert Smith.
Robert does his workday from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. It was me and him one-on-one in a dark hotel room between 2 and 3:30 in the morning talking about him and his band.
Cross sees himself as a proxy for every music fan that can't be in those rooms. But it's not just his access or encyclopedic knowledge that connects him to fans. It's his storytelling. Like the story about how he was about to lose his job when the rock station in Toronto he was working for was about to change to a country music station.
But the new management looked around and saw that there were these bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and so on. I thought, well, this seems to be a growing thing here in the early 1990s. So we're going to maintain this alternative rock format. But what we're also going to do is make it a lot more accessible to all these new listeners that we think that we're going to have. And in order to do that, we are going to have a program that explains where all this music came from and what it's all about, put everything into context. So they looked around the staff, they found one person with a history degree, me, and they said, you were doing this job.
Soon after, a major tragedy in the music world would take place.
I was on the air when Kurt Cobain died. I remember thinking that, don't screw this up, because we are dealing with real-time information in a pre-internet era. People forget that radio used to be the social media of the time.
In the age of music streaming, Cross has enjoyed even more success. His show, the longest-running music documentary program in Canada, has seen 21 million podcast downloads spanning almost every country in the world.
Back in the old days, we would have music magazines, and we would have the person on the radio, we would have the guy at the record store, and then we would have the physical piece of music itself, the album artwork, the liner notes, the lyrics, all those things. And we don't have that anymore. In a sense, the ongoing history of new music is a throwback to the old days when you would turn on the radio and the person on the other side of the speakers would tell you why the song, the album, the artist, the scene, the sound, why all these things mattered.
Context from the olden days is gaining Cross a new audience, the kids of his original fans that now tune in for his take in an evolving industry. Congratulations, Alan, from all of your friends at Global News. And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday evening with us. And tonight's Dear Canada is Vancouver's Filipino Christmas Market. It's an annual tradition with more than 40 vendors of festive food and gifts. We love seeing your Canada. Please email us your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.